Welcome to the Spirit of Mayberry, brought to you by Research Chief Spirit Walker from an undisclosed location deep within the bowels of the Andy Griffith Show Research Laboratory.
Hello, Mayberry Spirit Watchers. Welcome to another episode, another fan cast of Spirit of Mayberry. I'd like to say just right up front that I have no sponsors. Nobody pays me to advertise for them. I'm not getting any kickbacks from anything. Any website, any book that I recommend to you is purely because I believe in that product. That being said, I was contacted by Jan Newsom, who runs weaversdepartmentstore.com, and she informed me that they do, in fact, have the Andy Griffith Show book by Jack Kelly and also Mayberry 101 by Professor Neil Brower. They do have them in stock at weaversdepartmentstore.com. If you need them, go and get them. I guarantee you they make great Christmas gifts, and Weavers.com is just so customer friendly. You will love it, and you'll love Jan. She always includes a little note in there. So go to weaversdepartmentstore.com. Go to mayberrybooks.com. Pick up Randy Turner's books. Pick up my book, Mayberry Rerun Watcher's Guide to Season 1. Pick that up at mayberrybooks.com. You can also go to the imayberry.com and join the Andy Griffith Show community. You will not be sorry. These are great places to go, great websites to visit. So, that being said, let's start the fan cast. Today is Monday, October 17th, 2022. On Monday, October 17th, 1960, the third episode of the Andy Griffith Show aired on CBS, and it was called The Guitar Player. I named this fan cast episode The Guitar Players et al. Now, if you're confused about what et al. Means, it is an abbreviated Latin phrase that means and others. Because there were more than one guitar player on the Andy Griffith Show, and I'm going to point out a few of them that were just over the top good guitar players. They were, as Andy would say, extra good. I think that the guitar player of the Andy Griffith Show has to be Andy himself. And we're going to talk about him in just a minute after I talk about the guitar player featured in episode 3, The Guitar Player. The guitar player's name was Jim Lindsay. Andy, in the episode, helps him get a job as the guitar player for Bobby Fleet and his band With a Beat. Jim Lindsay was played by James Best, and James Best was not a guitar player. When James Best auditioned for the part of Jim Lindsay, he was asked if he played guitar. His answer was, "I have 3 guitars." Not an untrue statement. He did own 3 guitars. He just omitted the fact that he can't play them. Now, he did have a rudimentary idea of how to play a guitar. You can watch him as he's miming the guitar playing in episode 3 here. You can see that he forms sort of a C chord. It's a natural curl of the hand, where the hand curls like this to make a C chord. And an F chord, you would bar the bottom 2 strings here. And so he does sort of make those chords, but I think it's more because your hand naturally curls that way around the neck of the guitar. And you can see him running it up and down the neck of the guitar as he plays. Now, he mimes pretty good. He's not as bad as Keevee Hazelton in the Color episodes. He doesn't even come close to touching the guitar strings, let alone miming playing them. James Best does a pretty good job of miming it. So who actually played the guitar for James Best on the Guitar Player? Years later, James Best was asked who he thought played guitar for him, and he said, "I think it was Herb Ellis." Now, Herb Ellis was a popular guitar player, session guitar player at the time. A very good, very worthy to play the part. But when Earl Hagen, who was the music director for the Andy Griffith Show, was asked, he said it was Barney Kessel. Barney Kessel, another session guitar player. In fact, one of the most sought after guitar players, session guitar players for TV shows and movies. Barney Kessel and Herb Ellis knew each other. In fact, they recorded an album together. They were good friends. But which one was it? If you look at the close up, when Jim Lindsay is playing and it's a wide shot, you see that it's clearly James Best. But when they zoom in on a close up, you'll see a couple of things. You'll notice the hair on the arms, and you notice that his knee stops bouncing. Because when James Best is playing, his knee bounces constantly. But when the real guitar player is playing, his knee is constantly still. And the reason is he's doing a lot of intricate picking. He doesn't want to be bouncing his knee all around and bouncing the guitar all around. But was it Barney Kessel or was it Herb Ellis? I'm going to have to go with Barney Kessel on this. And the reason is Earl Hagen is the one who hired the guitar player to play the music and also took him into the studio at Glen Glen Sound Company and recorded the music. It's funny that the Andy Griffith Show, all the music was recorded at Glen Glen Sound. It's funny that the owner of the company was called Glenn. Well, his name was Glenn Glenn. And Bruce Bilson, the assistant director, he thought it was pretty funny that Glenn Glenn had a technician whose name was Leon Leon. That was his real name, Leon Leon. And it was even funnier when you found out that Leon Leon was from Walla Walla, Washington. So Glenn Glenn had a technician named Leon Leon from Walla Walla. It sounds like a comedy bit, but you can't write it. That funny. Anyway, Earl Hagen took the musician into Glen Glen Sound and recorded the music. You would think he would know who it was. So why would James Best say Herb Ellis? What could possibly have led him to believe that Herb Ellis was the guitar player? Here's a possible explanation. The second episode that James Best played the guitar player in was called The Guitar Player Returns. It was the 31st episode of season 1, both of them in season 1. And so Bobby Fleet, the man that played Bobby Fleet in the second appearance of Jim Lindsay in episode 31, the actor's name was Herbert Ellis. Not to be confused with Herb Ellis, the guitar player, but this was Herbert Ellis, the actor. And of course, they called him Herb Ellis. And it's just possible that Jim Lindsay or James Best mistook the name. Why is that possible? Well, James Best played in hundreds of westerns and TV shows and movies, and he got around. The Andy Griffith Show was a very small part of his acting career. He was in 2 out of 249 episodes, and he worked with Herb Ellis in one of those. And it's possible that his memory being fuzzy over the years because he had done so many parts on so many shows that he remembered the name Herb Ellis, and he knew Herb Ellis was a guitar player, and that's what came to mind. That's a completely logical explanation. I'm going to have to go with Earl Hagen's statement that it was Barney Kessel. So, Barney Kessel played the guitar for James Best, but the real guitar player in that episode was Andy Griffith himself. Andy Griffith, nobody played guitar for Andy. Andy played it for himself. A few times he would go in the studio and lay down tracks and mime them like he did in The Christmas Story when Ellie Walker was singing along with him and they were singing Away in a Manger. That was recorded in the studio. But a lot of times Andy would actually play on the set, live in front of the camera. And Andy was a master at the guitar. But Andy's picking style, as a guitar player myself, I've tried to emulate Andy's picking style for years, and I can't do it. Andy had a unique style of picking the guitar in that instead of using his thumb and his 2 fingers, the forefinger and the middle finger of his right hand, and picking the bass notes with his thumb, he would pick the bass notes with his thumb, but his forefinger hardly touched the strings. His second finger did all the action down here, and he held his hand at an angle this way. and he would pick sort of in a squeezing motion like this, but upward sometimes with this middle finger as he's going. Most finger picking styles, they hold their hand perpendicular and they pick this way. And you barely see their thumb moving. It's kind of behind their hand. But Andy had a unique style, and it was completely compatible with all bluegrass and country music that he played on the show. It was incredible. I cannot duplicate the sound Andy gets with the way that I pick, with a flat pick, a pick that you hold in your hand. Andy used no picks whatsoever. He was just incredible guitar player, very underrated guitar player. But I admire him greatly as a guitar player. He also played the ukulele, um, and he played a lot of other instruments. In fact, his first instrument that he ever played was the trombone. He learned that from a Moravian minister in Mount Airy, and who also was a band leader. And he taught Andy how to play the trombone. Andy played a lot of different other type instruments, tuba and the trombone, of course. But in the Mayberry band, he actually played the tuba. You can see Andy's tuba there is a smaller tuba. I don't know. I think it might be called a sousaphone. I'm no expert on wind instruments or brass instruments or reed instruments. Um, but it's funny that Andy was a singer and his first instrument was the trombone, because it's a little hard to accompany yourself on the trombone when you're singing. But Andy in this episode plays the tuba in the Mayberry band, and you can a little trivia here. You can see the entire crew that's filming the episode in the bell of the tuba. See the reflection? But it's pretty it's pretty interesting that Andy Griffith went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and graduated 4 years later with a degree in music. He then went on to teach music at Goldsboro High School in North Carolina for 3 years. So he was a big musician, big fan of music. He picked the music that they played on the show, and he loved bluegrass music. But he wasn't the only guitar player. There were other guitar players. The first one that comes to mind is first seen in episode 19, Mayberry on Record, when Andy brings in a bluegrass group to play with him on Mr. Maxwell's record. Now, Andy chose an established group called the Country Boys. They went on to become the Kentucky Colonels and would eventually be inducted into the International Bluegrass Hall of Fame. The guitar player for the Country Boys was Clarence White. It was the group was founded by three brothers, Clarence, Roland, and Eric White. Clarence was the guitar playing White brother, and he really revolutionized guitar method and guitar playing. For example, he and a friend developed what was called the B bender. The B bender was an electrical, or not electrical, a mechanical device that attached to the guitar, and it allowed the guitar to bend the B string to such a degree that was not possible with human fingers. It was like having an extra hand to bend the B string to the point that the guitar sounded like a steel guitar. That's not possible to do with a regular guitar, make it sound like a steel guitar. But this mechanical device that Clarence White and his friend developed actually allowed that to happen. It revolutionized some of the sounds, so much so that the Byrds, you might remember the rock group the Byrds back in the day, the Byrds hired him when one of their guitar players left the group. And Clarence joined the Byrds and just changed the sound of the group to such an amazing extent because of his guitar playing. He stayed with the Byrds until they disbanded in 1973, and he was actually the second longest serving member of the Byrds. Then he rejoined his brother Roland, and they began to tour as the White Brothers Band. And tragically, in 1973, while loading the equipment in the back of their car after a concert at 2 in the morning, they they were struck by a drunk driver. Roland was injured, but he recovered. Unfortunately, Clarence died of his injuries, and we lost a great guitar player. Another guitar player for the Country Boys, aka Kentucky Colonels, aka Hall of Famers, was Leroy McNeese. Now, Leroy Mack was the dobro player. Now, dobro is also called a resonator guitar, and it looks like a normal guitar, but it has a big round metal disc in the center of the guitar, and you play it flat with your fingers on top of the neck, like a steel guitar, and you can play with the slide, but you can also finger pick it. And that's what McNeese did. He does, because he's still alive and kicking. He picks with his fingers, and he became one of the premier dobro players in his day. He was fantastic. After leaving the Kentucky Colonels, he started the Born Again Bluegrass Band. He toured with them and played with them for 31 years. They recorded 12 albums. And after that, after they disbanded, and to this day, he leads the Leroy Mack and Gloryland Band. Of course, it's just called Leroy Mack and Gloryland, but it is a Christian bluegrass band, and he is still kicking it, still winning awards, still winning accolades from other musicians. He is just top of the line talented when it comes to guitar. So there was Leroy Mack, Clarence White, and Leroy Mack of the Country Boys both played guitar. Other guitar players. There was another bluegrass group, also a group that went on to be inducted in the International Bluegrass Hall of Fame. Both bluegrass groups that appeared on the Andy Griffith Show eventually became Hall of Fame groups. This group you might be a little more familiar with. They were in more episodes than the Country Boys were in. They played the Darling family with Briscoe Darling and Charlene Darling. But the boys, the four Darling boys, were actually an established bluegrass group who had just moved to Hollywood when Andy discovered them. And they were the Dillards was the name of the group. And they were formed by Doug Dillard and his brother Rodney Dillard, along with Mitch Jane and Dean Webb. And they formed the Dillards. And they became the Darlings on the TV show. But the guitar player for the Darlings, or the Dillards, was Rodney Dillard. Rodney Dillard played guitar and dobro, is in the Bluegrass Hall of Fame, and is still playing. In fact, he comes to Mayberry Days in Mount Airy, North Carolina. He was there this last one in September. He's still going strong, still kicking it. Rodney Dillard, it was their guitar player. Now, when I say et al., I didn't want to just keep it to guitar players. So since I mentioned those two bands, let's mention a little bit about the other band members, the and others. The and others were, for the Country Boys, the banjo player Billy Ray Latham. Now, Billy Ray was just a good, solid banjo player and went on to play for a long time. And one of the interesting things is he played in a band with the banjo player from the Dillards, who was Doug Dillard. Doug Dillard, by the way, was in the movie Popeye with Robin Williams. He played a banjo player in the movie, and he had a couple other guest spots. But Doug Dillard, after the Dillards disbanded, went on to form Doug Dillard and the Expedition. And one of the people that Doug Dillard hired in his band was Billy Ray Latham. And so they had a reunion where they played double banjos. Talk about dueling banjos. How would you love to see Doug Dillard and Billy Ray Latham playing in the same band? That would have been incredible. The other musician in the Country Boys that we need to mention is Eric White, the youngest of the White brothers. He played the upright bass. Remember, he had the big upright bass. Eric only appeared in Mayberry on Record in episode 19. He didn't make it in episode 29 when they played outside Quiet Sam's house uh, for the impromptu uh, baby shower for young Andy Becker, who was born, who Andy Taylor delivered. Um, but Eric White was a bass player, and the reason he wasn't in episode 29 is because on that day he was busy being inducted into the United States Army. So he went into the Army and left the band shortly after the Andy Griffith Show. The other person was Roland White, that I've also I mentioned that Roland um, played the mandolin, which is not really a guitar, but it's close to a guitar. It looks like a little mini guitar. It has double strings on it. It's like playing a 12-string guitar that has double strings all the way down. This a mandolin has double strings, and it has a very unique sound. And Roland was really a great mandolin player. Now, when it comes to the Dillards, I already mentioned Doug Dillard being a banjo player, but let me say something about Doug. Doug Dillard's fingers moved so fast that other banjo players could not imitate him, and he is a legend. He is an absolute legend among not only banjo players but guitar players that think his finger speed was so incredibly fast. And in fact, Andy noticed it too, because in one episode of the Andy Griffith Show, after they play a song together, he turns and he says, "How do you move your fingers so fast?" He actually says that on the show. I don't know if it was scripted, but Andy says it in the episode. Doug Dillard was also a writer. He wrote a lot of the songs that the Dillards played. The number one, most outstanding one was Doug's tune. Now, you might have heard it called Slimy River Bottom in their very first episode, the Darlings Are Coming. When they're in the jail cell and they start playing with Andy, they play a song that they call Slimy River Bottom. Now, it didn't have a name. See, the reason they just called it this funny name was because Doug Dillard had wrote it in between takes of the Andy Griffith Show. He wrote it, and then he just got together with the rest of the boys, and they played around with it during the breaks, and then they played it on the show. It was incredible. Well, they didn't have a name for it, and so Andy Griffith loved it so much that he brought it up again in a later episode. And in that episode, Andy actually says, when they're asking what should we play, Andy says, "Well, let's play Doug's tune." And so he called it Doug's tune because Doug Dillard wrote it, and the name just stuck. And that's what it became. But Andy Griffith, he encouraged the Dillards to write their own music. The benevolence of Andy Griffith was across the board in all areas of the show. And in music, he encouraged the Dillards to write and play their own music on the show. Because if they played generic bluegrass music, then they could play, all those solid ones like Cindy and some of those other songs. But if they wrote their own music, not only could they play them, but they would get residuals every time that episode airs. No other actor is going to get residuals after a certain amount of time. Right now, no one who acted on the Andy Griffith Show, including Andy himself, was getting residuals. But the Dillards were getting a check every time their song was played because it was copyrighted under their name. So they got a copyright residual. So it was brilliant that they did that. And they wrote a lot of songs. One of the songs that they wrote was called There Is a Time. And Charlene Darling, their on-screen sister, she sang the song the first time, and it was a big hit. Now, that song was actually written by the guitar player Rodney Dillard and Dean Webb, who played the mandolin. Not only was he a good mandolin player, but he collaborated on some of the lyrics, and they actually wrote that song. And he loved that song so well, or so much, I should say, that the last time it was played on the show, Andy sang it himself. The Dillers never appeared. Andy sang it. They got a royalty check. He loved that song, There Is a Time. It is a beautiful, beautiful song. The other member of the Dillards was bass player Mitch Jane. And just like Leroy Mack learned to play the dobro just to be a part of the band, the Country Boys, Mitch Jane learned to play the bass just to be a member of the Dillards. And Mitch Jane was a character. I've heard interviews with him. He could tell stories with the best of them. He's the one that smoked the pipe, played the upright bass. Just Mr. Cool all the way around, but he was hilarious. He could have been a professional stand-up comic. In fact, he loved stories, and he would collect stories from all over the country. All these funny stories that people would tell, and he also collected phrases, things that people would say that he thought was funny, and then he would interject them in his stories. And he was a humorist. He really was a humorist. And whenever the Dillards broke a string on stage and had to restring an instrument, they would call Mitch Jane forward to the microphone, and he would just simply talk and tell stories and jokes. He was one hilarious guy. He would say things like, the guy was so drunk he made his living recognizing people by their shoelaces. Just off the wall stuff that he would say in his stories. He was an amazing guy. I wish I could have met him, but I have interviews that I've heard of him, and he was just hilarious. These are the et al. These are the guitar players of the Andy Griffith Show. There's nothing like them. They were fantastic. The show is fantastic, and it lives on in all of us as we spread the Mayberry spirit. Do me a favor, subscribe to this channel, and I will really appreciate it the rest of my life. I guarantee you. Hey, until next time, I thank you.